Okay, so I'm going to go over the body and the reproduction of femininity. So, Bordeaux is looking at the role our bodies play in the societal discourse about bodies. So, basically, I'm going to kind of unpack what all that crap means, but it's very highly theoretical. So, really, she's trying to talk about how part of our societal discourse about bodies involves this symbolization and reproduction of gender, our understandings about gender. So the concept of the body is more than just a physical object. It is also, a medium of the culture. So, she looks at certain theorists like Bourdieu or Foucault to kind of, as the philosophical underpinnings of what she's, using to interpret how bodies are being used under this guise of femininity. Okay, so Bourdieu was really looking at culture and how the larger culture can make its way into our daily habits or into our bodies. So, he was looking at what he calls habitus. So the idea that you are so socialized into certain roles and functions in the culture that you actually take them into your body and then perform them, right? So, you could think of your daily beauty rituals for women as an example of this, which we'll talk about in a minute. But, just how it's something that's literally embodied as to what makes a man or a woman. So, she also looks at Foucault, who, you know, his theory is coming from examining how the culture shapes our ideas and notions about our bodies. So basically, our bodies are shaped and understood in relation to the historical forms of selfhood, desire, masculinity, femininity. So it has to do with these kind of socio historical cultural ideations in what he calls discourse, which is much more so than just, people talking. Discourse is what is being talked about, who is saying it, what institutions are putting out what messages, who has the power and authority of that message, right? Who isn't saying it, what isn't being said. So even in itself, the kind of discourse itself is kind of complicated as a notion. But anyway, super interesting. So basically, Susan Bordeaux is trying to take these, Bourdieu's and Foucault's kind of examinations of how the body is shaped by the culture and also how we in turn perform the cultural expectations through our bodies. And so she comes up with this kind of idea, using Foucault's term docile bodies, basically arguing that in our culture, the body is regulated by the norms of cultural life in the same way that they were looking at it. But it's not just through this ideology, but through the organization and regulation of the time, space, and movements of our daily lives. So basically, our bodies are trained, they're shaped, they're impressed with the cultural notions of selfhood, desire, masculinity, and femininity. So, really looking at Foucault's understanding of how our bodies get shaped, but, she's looking at how, if you look historically, this discipline of normalization of the female body continues to be this kind of durable, flexible strategy of social control. So our culture clearly has a preoccupation with appearance, which still affects women far more so than men. And so this kind of functions as a backlash phenomenon, which reasserts existing gender configurations against any attempt to shift or transform the power relations that's going on in the larger society. This kind of critique or control, the social control of the body, is then used as a means to reassert the assumed or expected gender hierarchies. So, she talks about needing an effective political discourse. So she's saying, we need to have a better effective political discourse about the female body, a discourse that can really analyze the insidious and often paradoxical ways that this use of women's bodies is used as a form of modern social control. So to do this, we have to look at Foucault's idea of power as something that's not just possessed by one group leveled against another, But, most of us, when we understand power, we see it in a top-down function, right? So that people at the top have power, the rest of us don't, and they dictate what we have to do. But really, when Foucault is talking about power, he talks about how, yes, of course, there's a top-down approach, but it is also across all mediums. So, basically, we don't just have power coming from the top down, we also have power going from each of us towards each other, meaning that we tend to police each other, right? So we, have power ourselves, and, we can use that to kind of judge or control other people's bodies around us. But power is also not just repressive, it can be constitutive, meaning it's a force that wants to proliferate and make the world reflect its image. So in the case of femininity, women are not forced by the government to wear cosmetics, right? They willingly do so and choose largely to do so repetitively every day, right? So that we need a political discourse that kind of understands that embodiment of these social norms. And we also need a discourse that will let us account for the subversion of potential rebellion, so that power can make us conform, but it's also a force we can use to rebel.